Par télévision. Donc au départ, on faisait
Six months ago, I decided to learn Unreal Engine from scratch and make my first game. Here's what happened. I tried learning Unreal Engine a couple of times in the past, but quickly gave up due to this idea, and I couldn't wait to dive deep. Wow! What's up, noobs? Welcome to another devlog episode of Punch a Bunch. I've got some incredible stuff to show you this week, so we'll just get right into it. Roll the intro. Basic attack setup. We're calculating damage. So I went ahead and created a simple health bar that we can use to track our health. I'm just using the built-in stuff that comes with Unreal. Don't worry, we're gonna make a nice looking custom one later. It's gonna be like, the point is, we're registering damage and we're tracking our health, which means that now we can trigger a knockout event when the player reaches 0% health. I've got a few ideas what we can do here, so let's kick the episode off with that. Okay, so I'm thinking ragdoll plus slow-mo. I mean, come on, what else? So we gotta figure out a way to make the character relax. Basically, we need to figure out how to turn our character into a ragdoll. This turned out to be pretty easy to do. All I really have to do is turn down the strength of our physical animation component and activate physics simulations on the mesh itself. Oh, there we go. Yeah, oh, okay. I mean, yeah, there it is. This is messed up, man. This could be a feature. Say, if you get knocked out and if you manage to get up from this position, you're back in the game. Okay, I set it up so that you stand up until your health reaches 0. So let's see how this goes. Whoa, it's a bit janky looking, but yeah, come on. This is awesome. Come on, boy, get up, fight like a man. Bye-bye. The character was looking a bit too stiff, so I played around with some different strength settings to find a good balance. I also tried adding a physical force in the final blow to make things a little more interesting. Oh, wow! That's amazing!
Two weeks ago, I made the hardest rage game ever. Now, so even more people can suffer, I'm going to turn it into a mobile game. And how about I only get 24 hours to do it? Alright, the current time is 7:25. Let's get started. Because I have my priorities straight, I first made a particle effect for when the blob sticks to something. Yeah, I think we need some more particles. Maybe a few more. There we go. Oh yeah, if you don't know, Stick With It is a game where you control this squishy blob guy that can stick to stuff. And you have to time this moving arrow to jump in a certain direction. The goal is to get to the top of the map, but a small mistake can force you to start over. And yeah. This might actually be the hardest game ever. I don't think anyone's actually completed it, and most people don't even get past this second level. But I do want the game to be slightly fun to play, so here's my plan for this mobile version. We'll have two difficulty modes. The game as it currently is will be called Impossible Mode, and then I'll add in an easier version with checkpoints and a slower arrow called Hard Mode. Alright, let's get this implemented. I first made a checkpoint object with a trigger collider. Then I added on a script that detects when something intersects with the trigger, which will save the player's progress. After placing checkpoints around the map and throwing together some more code, we've got a working checkpoint system. In the last video, I made some spike objects that would pop the blob and force you to restart. But then I decided to remove them from the game. I don't think the spikes really fit the game too well. But now that there are checkpoints in the game, I think it's safe to bring the spikes back. There we go. Now if you're in hard mode and miss a jump, instead of falling to a lower level, you'll just hit some spikes and can reset to the last checkpoint. Wow, we're actually making pretty good progress so far. I think I'll actually be... Wait. Do you hear that? When actually building the game and running it on my phone, it had a lot of issues. First up, it takes about 10 seconds to load the game after pressing the play button, and the ground doesn't load, apparently, so I'll need to track down what is causing this. So after like an hour of debugging, I finally tracked down what was causing the long load time. Turns out trying to load in 60 megabytes worth of music tracks is pretty slow. So for now I just removed the music, and later I'll probably try to add in some smaller compressed versions of the tracks. Alright, now the game loads fine, but it's only running at 30 frames per second. And yeah, I'm not actually this bad at the game, it's just the low frame is just messing me up, okay. After another hour and a half of optimizations, and questioning why I made this a 24-hour challenge, the game is finally running at a smooth 60 frames per second, which you clearly see in this 30 FPS recording. Okay, now hopefully we can get back to making actual progress. Because the player can now actually die, we're going to need an end screen with a button that lets you restart at the most recent checkpoint. if you're impatient like me and don't want to wait for the end screen animation, I also added a smaller checkpoint button in the corner, so you can just restart whenever.
Hello everyone and welcome to this video. Ooh, well, this is new. Anyway, something that I personally really think is fun to do is top-down shooting. And it's actually quite different from regular top-down movement like we showed how to do in a recent video, because the player always needs to point towards the mouse. So in this video we'll set up a top-down player complete with movement, aiming, and shooting. But first, this video is sponsored by Jason Wyman. If you haven't already heard about him, he's the creator of the amazing Unity 3D Masterclass, which takes you all the way from the very fundamentals of game dev to using Unity on a professional level. It will teach you the principles of solid code architecture and how to build a variety of game types. What's so cool about this course is that you get to work alongside other students and get live one-on-one help from Jason himself. He also has an amazing VR course which will teach you how to work with VR and even make a game. And then you will make multiple finished games and even have the opportunity to customize and show off your unique work to the class. Sign up now and the first 50 people will get a free t-shirt from Line of Code, as well as a big discount and other bonuses on both courses. Simply click the link in the description to get started. Also, I'm really excited to announce that we will be attending Unite Copenhagen later this month. If you've never been to Unite, it's a huge game developer conference hosted by Unity, and I feel this one is going to be particularly big. Of course, it's in Copenhagen, which is also our home city, and the event will be taking place from the 23rd to the 26th of September. Tickets are for grabs now, and since we are also going, we talked to Unity and they agreed to give everyone a 20% discount. Simply click the link in the description and use this coupon code. Note that this doesn't work for training day classes, but I really hope to see a lot of you there. Alright, with that said, let's get shooting. So as you can see, I've set up a quick example scene here. The sprites that I'm using for the environment is from the Tiny RPG Forest pack. And for the player, I'm going to be using a soldier from the Armored Soldiers 2D pack. That is in the description for both if you want to use them, and they are of course 100% free. So from the Armored Soldiers pack, I've gone ahead and taken this sprite right here from the PSD file. It's just a simple red soldier sprite. You can use any sprite that you like. I'm just going to go ahead and set the ordinate layer to 10K to make sure that he appears on top of everything else. And now we're ready to start setting up our player. So the first thing that he needs is a rigid body. I'm going to hit Add Component and search for rigid body 2D. I'm going to set the gravity scale to 0 to make sure that he doesn't fall down. And I'm also going to freeze his rotation on the Z. This is not because we don't want him to rotate. We definitely want him to do that, but we want to be able to control that rotation ourselves. This way we can make sure that he always points toward the mouse and that he won't go off course if he collides with something. And with that, we can add our player movement script. The player movement script is of course going to be responsible for moving around our player, but it's also going to take care of aiming. So let's go ahead and hit Add Component here. Let's write player movement. Let's say create an add, and let's double click to open it up in Visual Studio. So first of all, we can go ahead and delete the start method here, and we're of course going to need a few variables. The first of which is a float to control our movement speed. Let's call it move speed and set it equal to 5 by default. We also need a reference to our rigid body component, because this is the 5 by default. We also need a reference to our rigid body component, because this is the one that's going to be moving around our player. So let's create a public rigid body 2D, and let's call it RB. Now of course, whenever we're doing movement in Unity, we want to split it up into two functions. We want to use our update function for getting the input for our movement, so this is where we will trigger our movement, and then we'll use a void fixed update function for actually moving our player based on this input. So let's start by gathering some input in our update function. Here we're going to be using input.getAxisRaw, and first of all we want the horizontal axis, and we of course want to store this in a variable so that we can access it inside of our fixed update. Let's go ahead and create a vector2. Let's call it movement, and then inside of our update we can set movement on our x equal to input.getAxisRaw horizontal. We then do the same thing for our y. And so movement.y equals input.getAxisRaw, and this time we'll of course use vertical. So we're now gathering our input on the X and the Y, and we then use that to actually move around our player inside of the fixed update. So here we'll write RB to access the rigid body. We'll use a function called movePosition, and this will simply move our object to the position that we input. In our case, we want to move it to our current position, so RB.position, plus our movement vector. And we can then multiply this with our move speed to be able to control the speed of this movement, as well as time.fixed delta time in order to make sure that the speed of our movement will not depend on how many times a fixed update is called. So this should give us a nice, smooth, uniform movement. In fact, if we just save this, we can jump into Unity, select our soldier, drag in our rigid body 2D component to the RB slot, and then hit play. And as you can see, I can now move around the player using the WASD keys or the arrow keys. Really cool. So now that our movement is in place, we can start to look at aiming. And the idea of this is exactly the same. We find some input inside of our update method, and we aim inside of the fixed update. So first of all, to get some input, we'll be using input.mousePosition. And this is simply the current position of our mouse in pixel coordinates. And this is exactly what we want. However, our game doesn't exist in pixel coordinates. It exists in in-game units. So we need to convert this position from a screen point exit position. And this is simply the current position of our mouse in pixel coordinates. And this is exactly what we want. However, our game doesn't exist in pixel coordinates. It exists in in-game units. So we need to convert this position from a screen point to a world point. And we do this using a simple function on our camera. Of course, that means we need a reference to our camera. So let's go in here and create a public camera. And let's just call it cam. We can then access this camera by doing cam dot and then use the function called screen to world point. So this will convert our mouse position from pixel coordinates to world units. There we go. And we then store this in another variable. So let's create another vector 2. Let's call it mouse position, or just mouse pos for short. And let's set mouse pos equal to our cam.screen to world point, where we input our mouse position. So now that we know exactly where our mouse is, all we need to do is rotate our player to face that point. And we do this in 2 steps. So the first thing that we need to do is get the direction to our mouse position from where we are currently standing. To do this, we simply subtract the 2 vectors. So we'll create a vector tool. This is going to be the direction that we want to look in, and it's going to simply be equal to our mouse position minus our current position. If you've never dealt with vector math before, this might be completely new to you, but if you take 2 vectors and subtract them, you're going to get a vector that points from one to the other. So in this case, if we have our player position right here, and we have our mouse position up here, we're simply going to subtract the 2 vectors and get a vector that points from our player to our mouse position. However, in order to actually rotate our player, we don't just need a direction, instead we need an angle. In other words, we need to know what to set our Z rotation of our player to in order to point in that direction. To do this, we use a function called atan2. So we'll create a float, call it angle. We use a function called atan2. So we'll create a float, call it angle, and this is the Z rotation, and we'll set it equal to mathf.atan2. And here we're going to input a few things. So what is atan2? Well, atan2 is a function, it's a mathematical function that returns the angle between the x-axis and a 2D vector starting at 0 and terminating at x, y. So that might sound really complicated, but in reality it's actually fairly graphically simple. So here's a graph explaining atan2. If we imagine our player is standing at the center here, and we imagine that this black dot here is our mouse position at this time, well then we can simply use the atan2 function where we input the x and y position of our mouse, and it's then going to find the angle from our x-axis to this directional vector. And that's exactly what we need, because we already have this directional vector here pointing from our player to the mouse. It's what we created just here. So we're simply going to take our x and y of a look dear vector, and this is a tiny weird quirk with the atan2 function, is that it takes in the y first and then the x. So we're going to put in lookdear.y and then lookdear.x, that's all we need. Of course, attempt2 returns the angle in radians, so we need to change that to degrees, and so we'll multiply with mathf rad 2 degree, and this is simply a constant. It's 57.29578, you can see it here, and it's just the conversion from radians to degrees. It's that simple. And finally, I found by testing this that in order to get my player to point in the right direction, I need to offset this with 90 degrees. So if your player is actually following the mouse but always pointing at a 90-degree angle, then you can always subtract or add 90 degrees to suit your needs here. And finally, we can apply this to our player. So we'll simply go rb.rotation equals the angle that we just calculated. So if we now save that and go into Unity, and here we need to reference our calculated. We'll simply go rb.rotation equals the angle that we just calculated. So if we now save that and go into Unity, and here we need to reference our camera, so I'm simply going to drag in our main cam here, and let's then hit play. As you can see, our player is now looking in the direction of my mouse at all times. Really, really cool. And we can of course move him around at the same time. Awesome. So at this point we are moving around and we are aiming, and so we are ready to start shooting some stuff. And the first thing that we're going to do here is add a fire point. This is just an empty object that will specify from where we want to instantiate our bullets. So in my case, for the soldier here, I'm going to right click, hit create empty, and I'm going to press W to switch to the move tool here. And I'm simply going to take this object here and move it to the end of the soldier's barrel. You can move this to anywhere you want your bullet to fire from. I'm simply going to call this the fire point, and that's pretty much it for that. We of course also need to create a bullet. Now I've taken another sprite from the Armored Soldiers pack. You can of course use any sprite that you'd like. I'm simply going to click and drag this in, and here is what I'm going to be using as a bullet. Of course, in order to make this into an actual bullet, we need to give it a rigid body 2D. Again, we'll set the gravity scale to 0, and we'll just leave all the other properties as is. I'm also going to add a collider to this bullet so that we can later register whenever it hits something. I'm just going to use a simple box collider 2D. I'm going to hit edit collider here and just place it around the bullet. So now that we've set up our bullet, we can go ahead and drag it into our project panel. So now that we've set up our bullet here and just place it around the bullet. So now that we've set up our bullet, we can go ahead and drag it into our project panel, and this is going to make a prefab out of it, so then we can remove it from our scene, and we then create a script that is going to spawn in this bullet whenever we need it. So on our soldier here, let's go ahead and create another script now, and let's call this one shooting. Let's hit new script, create an add. Again, I'm going to delete the start method here, and instead I'm going to add in a few variables. I'm going to create a public transform, and this is simply going to be a reference to our fire point object. I'm also going to create a public game object, and this is going to reference our bullet prefab that we just created. And finally, let's create a public float, which is going to control the bullet force. And let's just default that to something like 20. Now inside of our update, we can check whenever we want to fire. So we'll go if input.get button down, and the button that we want to check for here is fire 1. Fire 1 is one of those default input bindings in Unity. If you haven't changed it, it's going to be bound to mouse 1. Now remember that Unity is currently reworking the entire input system. I cannot imagine this not working for quite a while, but if it is giving you issues, definitely check out our dedicated video on the new input system. You should be able to just slap that right into this script. Alright, so whenever we press this button, we want to go ahead and shoot. So let's create a dedicated function for that. Let's just call it shoot, and let's go ahead and make it down here. So we'll write void shoot, open close some parentheses and curly brackets. And this function is actually going to be fairly simple. We want to do two things in here. First of all, we want to create a bullet at our fire point. And second of all, we want to apply a lot of force to this bullet to make it fly out of the gun. So let's start by creating the bullet. We do this using the instantiate function.
А, ну да, выиграл, да, нет, он тебя, но он тебя помог. Да, ну да.
Function. Here we feed it the prefab that we want to create, so we want to make a bullet prefab. We also give it a position, so we want to spawn it at firepoint.position, as well as a rotation. We want to use firepoint.rotation. There we go. That creates our bullet. However, we also need to be able to reference this bullet in order to modify it afterwards. In our case, we want to add a force to it. So to retain a connection to the bullet, we're going to write GameObject bullet and set it equal to the instantiated bullet. This way, we can now use this bullet variable. So in order to access the rigid body 2D, we'll use bullet dot get component rigid body 2D. There go. And we then store this in another variable. So we'll create a rigid body 2D, call it RB, and set it equal to the rigid 2D bullet. And finally, we can then access this RB and use the function add full.
Нет, нет, наоборот, нет. Наоборот, ну нет. Ну вот, не знаю, там тебя просто, да. Что рассказал здесь тебя? Нет, нет. Наоборот. Что значит рассказать наоборот? Не знаешь ничего сам, что ли? Ну нет, ну на, вот это найдем.
Force. And so we can add a force in the direction of our fire point dot up vector, multiplied with our bullet force, and the force mode here, force mode 2D, is going to be impulse, because we want to add an instant force impulse to the rigid body 2D. So again, what's happening here, well, we're instantiating, spawning in our bullet. We're saying at this point we want to name it bullet so that we can access it later. We then access this bullet and get the rigid body 2D component on the bullet. We call this component RB, and at this point we want to name it bullet so that we can access it later. We then access this bullet and get the rigid body 2D component on the bullet. We call this component RB. We use it to access a function on the component called add force, where we add a force in the firepoint.up vector multiplied with the bullet force. I totally understand if you find this code confusing. It is definitely a bit confusing. Just know that we're creating the bullet and we're making it fly at a high velocity. And with that, let's try and save this. Go into Unity. Here we'll drag in our fire point. We'll also drag in our bullet prefab. And if we now hit play and click our mouse, we can see that a bullet indeed does fly out. It also kind of collides with everything that it touches, and it just simply stays there. But we do definitely have bullets, and we can now shoot all around, which is really cool. So the final thing that we need to do is, of course, make our bullet react to it hitting something. So to do this, we can simply go to our bullet prefab and add a new component, and here we'll create a bullet script. Let's double click it to open it up, and we can remove both the update and the start function here, because all we need in here is a function that triggers whenever we collide with something. And Unity, of course, has one of these by default. It's called void on collision into 2D. Now this function also takes in an argument of type collision 2D, and we can just call it, well, collision. And what this is doing is simply gathering some information about what happened in this collision. So in here we can get some information about what we hit, so the collider that we made contact with. We also get the relative velocity between the two colliding objects. There's a bunch of information in here. And this is of course super useful if you want to damage whatever you hit, because you can access components on the colliding object. However, for now, all we want to do is just add a cool explosion effect and remove a bullet. So to do this, we need a reference to a prefab that we can instantiate with this explosion. So we'll create a public game object. Let's call it hit effect. And I've actually already gone ahead and prepared an effect using some sprites I had from another asset store pack called Warped Caves. I'll of course have a link to this in the description as well, but I've simply gone ahead and created a short animation out of these that will place a tiny explosion. So I'm simply going to go to my bullet here and just drag in this hit effect. You can use anything you'd like. You can also use particle effects if you want to. And then inside of our script, we can just instantiate it in the exact same way that we did with our bullet. So let's go instantiate. We want to instantiate the hit effect. We want to do that at the current position of our bullet, so transform the position. So we recently held the 4th official Braggies Game Jam, an event where you get 1 week to make a game from scratch. And we were so overwhelmed with how many people participated in the jam. Over 8,800 people joined, and we got more than 1,800 submissions, which is more than twice as many as the previous and almost 11 times the first jam. As always, we've been looking forward to seeing what you guys can make in such a small amount of time, and once again, we are impressed with how creative you guys are. Truly an amazing job. And before we have a look at some of the cool games, I just want to give a huge thank you to everyone who joined the jam and helped make it awesome. We've been playing as many games as we possibly could, and while all of them are great in their own way, we've picked out a few to show you in this video. So, without further ado, let's check out some of the awesome games from the Brackeys Game Jam. But first, this video is sponsored by Recolor. Recolor offers a number of tools that make it easier than ever to create 3D animations for your game. Through AI-powered 3D motion animation, you can turn any regular 2D video of a person into a full set of 3D motion capture data. This means no need for advanced motion capture equipment, which just makes this a very affordable solution for motion capture. With the desktop solution Studio, you get unlimited at-home motion capture for less than $400. Once you're happy with an animation, simply export the FX file and drag it into your project. Later this month, Recolor will also be launching a live stream feature for Unity, which gives you the possibility to do real-time 3D animations inside the Unity editor. So, if this sounds interesting, I definitely recommend you check out Recolor by simply clicking the link in the description. So the theme for the jam was Rewind.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
So let's rewind and take a look at some of the games we played in no particular order. Also, huge thanks to Master2K for his support on Patreon. First up, Divided Dungeon is a game where you control a group of characters trying to escape a dungeon. They must work together in order to escape, which might sound like the pitch for a multiplayer game, but it's not. Instead, you take control of one character at a time, then rewind, and now that character will move on its own based on the inputs you just made. Pretty simple premise, but it gets chaotic very fast, because you can still push and offset the other characters, completely screwing up their path. So you really have to plan out every move you're going to make, and then execute them perfectly. The only thing I would do to make the game even better is change the movement to be more precise in order to more easily maneuver around your teammates. Other than that, I had a ton of fun, and I think this game has a lot of potential. A game with great and snappy controls, though, is Lost in City. In this game, you play as a girl who is looking for her cat that got lost in the city. The girl has a special power that allows her to reverse time of her surroundings, but not herself. This very simple mechanic makes for some very engaging and challenging puzzles. Plus, I really like the idea of the wind blowing backwards when you're reversing time. Overall, a solid experience. And speaking of experience, here's someone who's not having a particularly great one. In It's a Wrap, you're a movie director that just wants to make a nice film. But people keep messing up their parts, so you have to correct the timings on the timeline in the bottom so you can get the shot done. When ready, you can go into action mode to play out the scene as the protagonist. The gameplay of It's a Wrap is very unique and fun, and I enjoyed every second of it. And it's a great excuse to put the player in all kinds of weird situations, which allows for some pretty fun and unexpected levels. Another game I really like is Recolor. The game has a simple concept. You can change the color of your cube to solve puzzles, and then rewind back through the colors at any time. As you can imagine, it gets complicated very quickly. I think this is really interesting, because normally in platformers, you deal with everything linearly. You handle the current obstacle, and then move on to the next. Recolor is the complete opposite, because you have to plan out every move you're going to make in the entire level before you actually do it. The graphics and controls are very simple, but the experience feels quite fleshed out anyways. Great game with complicated puzzles. Another game that had me planning out every move was Retrograde. Here you have to make your way through the level to reach the rift. Once you've done this, you have to do it again, but this time you must avoid evil clones of you that are tracing your path backwards. These clones will kill on contact, so you really have to plan your route and timing. I am in love with this concept, and it's only possible because of the game's great movement code. I really felt in control of the character, making me able to do very precise jumps and movements, which I think is pretty necessary in order to complete levels such as this. Let's not talk about how long that took to complete, but I really enjoy a challenge, and this game gave me that in an extremely fun way. Besides that, the game looks amazing. Everything from the pitch dark to the cool effects when rewinding time and the intense glitchy soundtrack. Now, if you just need to relax for a few minutes on top of the frantic gameplay of Retrograde, I suggest you try out Playback. It's a cute little puzzle game that's all about making people feel good. See, the people in town are feeling a bit down and could really use something to brighten up their day. So it's up to you to record sounds with your cassette recorder and use them to help people out. Playback is a fun and innovative game with cute graphics and story. Another awesome game was Ducks Knocks. This game not only fits the theme perfectly, but it also looks and sounds great. The core gameplay is simple. You move the white rabbit to the black one, and the black will follow the same route to the beginning. The twist here is that only the black rabbit can interact with green objects. Pretty simple mechanic, but it allows for some extremely complex and mind-boggling puzzles, and I must admit that some of them took embarrassingly long to figure out. Ducks Knocks is a solid game just waiting for a release date. In Rewind, you're a paper plane pilot. Try saying that 3 times in a row. As a paper plane pilot, you're not only able to control the plane, but also the wind around it. Use this power to navigate through the tough weather and to prove that you're the best paper plane pilot the world has ever seen. Also, something seems strangely familiar. This soundtrack kind of reminds me of...
Сотрудники для тех, кто развивает бизнес.
Хочешь сотрудником моим быть?
Кому важна скорость
По делу вот я сейчас 20 тысяч должен, 10 тысяч тебе.
и прозрачность под-
of something.
Я только ты меня...
Next up, we got another game with almost the same name, but completely different gameplay. Rewind is a puzzle platforming game where you use your time reversal
Ну так
mechanic to get
нехорошо,
to the end
да.
of the levels. Everything
Yeah,
but the player
right.
can be rewinded separately. This means that unlocked doors can work as bridges and falling platforms become elevators. All the game needs is more levels. In Psycho Taxi Rewind, you're a taxi driver that has to get customers to their desired destination.
Cool.
But there's a twist. Your taxi is powered by a rewindable string. Get it? Because you twist it. Anyways, every time you pick someone up, they'll wind up your taxi to give you more time. The goal of the game is to get as many points as possible, and how do you get points? By being fast, of course, and by being as stylish as possible while doing it. And by stylish, I of course mean chaotic. I think the gameplay speaks for itself. This is a very frantic but fun game. It kind of reminds me of old arcade games. If I had to give some constructive feedback, it would be that it takes way too long to restart the game. We just want to get back into the fun. Now, one of my absolute favorite games is Sir Ewind. I see what you did there. In this game, you play as the wonderfully designed character Sir Ewind, a time-traveling space wizard assigned with the task of eliminating all paradox creatures. His only weapon is his ability to manipulate space-time. You can rewind and freeze time for the entire map or just a single creature. Sir Ewind can use the cuckoo clocks scattered around the levels to eliminate the enemies. I really liked the seamless tutorial at the start. It helped me get going without slowing the game down. Pun intended. Everything about this game is me get going without slowing the game down. Pun intended. Everything about this game is very polished. The audio design is nice, the graphics are awesome, and the mechanics and levels are great. And speaking of time travel, here's a game that has absolutely nothing to do with that. Rhythm Rewind is a simple rhythm game, but boy is it addicting. I typed along for way too long, even though it only has one song. Ooh, that rhymes. I typed along for way too long, even though it only has one song. It's really hard at first, but when you get a hang of the controls, it feels so good to play, and you'll have a hard time putting this game down. The funkiness is simply too strong. I don't have much else to say, just go play it. You want what the... question mark? Rewind that is the name of the next game. In this game, you start out with a scene where some kind of accident happens. Some knights get run down by a boulder, or a king gets shot by arrows. It is your job to wind back time and save everyone. You do this by adding forces to objects around the scene. With this you can prevent the arrow from hitting the explosive barrels, or throw a table at the barrage of arrows heading towards the king. Cool concept, however the implementation is pretty rough. But clean up some rough edges and you have a really cool game. Finally, Rhombus takes the rewind time mechanic and adds some more layers. In this game, you can choose to rewind everything or leave your character as is. Also, you can jump, so most of the time you have to rewind your fall to get back up. But this means that whatever you did before that will get rewinded. This is where the locks come in. With the locks, you can lock an object, making it immune to time rewinding. These few mechanics make for some fun and challenging levels. Besides that, it's just a cute and really polished game. And I completed it on the last chord of the song, which I found pretty satisfying. And now that we've played the final chord, I guess that's all the games that we have time for in this video. Of course, there are so many amazing games that we haven't talked about, so I really encourage you to go play them yourself. There's of course a link in the description where you can find all of the Jam games. And the voting period has ended, so a huge congratulations to the makers of Dogs Knox for winning overall, and to all of the category winners on the screen. Now, finally, I would just... just like to thank AquaXV, CodeMiss, Coda, Job, the Dutch Magic Card, and Jillian for organizing this amazing event, and thanks to all the participators for making it awesome. Also, don't forget to check out Radical. Get started making affordable 3D motion capture animations by simply clicking the link in the description. On that, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks to all the awesome YouTube supporters who donated in August, and special thanks to Cat the Sound, Lost Violence Love Forever, Scott McKee, Chris Verify, Replica Studios, Leo Lissette, Nobby Ninja, Jason Newchescu, Piano Seesonlag, Bobby Reynolds, Donatien Gaston, Storm Daniels, Dennis Solomon, Game Dev.
Hey there, how's it going? If you didn't know, the Kenny Game Jam just finished up this weekend. And if you don't know who Kenny is,
Franz, Hans.
So 5 years ago now, I started work on my first Unity project with very little experience. I mean, I've made some smaller hobbyist games as a teenager in Game Maker Studio, but this was my first time working on something professional, and progress was really slow. Beyond the obvious art and programming challenges, I also had to worry about a whole range of skills that I hadn't really fully considered, like music and sound design, user experience, marketing, and game design itself. And it's no secret that game development takes a really long time. But fast forward 5 years, and I now have a relatively complete game that I'm really happy with. It's simple, it's juicy, and it's fun. However, the path from there to here was very shaky, with a lot of setbacks and tough lessons. And halfway through, I even had to scrap development and start over from scratch. But you know, these kinds of problems seem to happen to a lot of new developers, to varying degrees, of course. And so that's why I'm making this video, so that you can learn something from my mistakes. Now, let's begin at the beginning. So, I started development with a whole bunch of different ideas and plans for my game. I wanted to make a roguelike, but instead of setting it in a dungeon like is typical, it would instead be set on a tropical island. And I wanted the forces of nature to be your primary enemy. So there could be rivers that soak you, or sticky mud that slows you down, and you need to prepare the correct remedies and antidotes if you wanted to explore far from home. And I I also wanted it to be turn-based, so that you can really consider your moves and play tactically. And I thought it would be cool if the overworld was made out of tiling patches of land, and these tiles could be shuffled to create unique terrain on each run. Put all of this together, along with a bunch of other ideas that I had, I ended up with a really lengthy wish list of stuff. And it wasn't really clear in my mind exactly how all of these pieces were going to fit together. But even so, I was excited to get started, and so I just jumped straight in. And immediately I hit the first major roadblock. Programming is really hard. I mean, I kind of knew that since I did programming at university, but I really underestimated the jump between coding my uni homework and coding an entire game. And on top of this, I was learning to use Unity at the same time, and it's a complicated beast with hundreds of different features. I had to learn about cameras and the UI canvases, and animation, and particle systems, and profiling. You know, even just getting to grips with an object-oriented program.
Нет, да, скажи свое слово. Бот. Да. Бот. Zawsze jak coś tego rysuję jednak. Круглый. Не наоборот, не, вот ты круглый. Слишком круглый, если становишься, тогда отпускает тебя. Что это я такой спокойный? Где у меня деньги-то будут? Где моя прибыль будет тогда? Никто тебя не будет брать просто. Дурака хочет из меня сделать, света. хорошо, что ли, серьезно?
I have never written a line of code in Python before, and now that I'm
Моно. Нет, нормально. Вот она и говорила, что испытание для пения твое прошло. Да нет, наоборот. Да нет, наоборот. Вот нет, наоборот. А что ты не пишешь себя видишь? Хорошо, сегодня мой день сдохшего овца. Видите, вчера нормальная работа, но понимаю. Не очень это хорошо, конечно. Бризная тетка. Ну ладно, ну да. Ну не надо, она сама так думает просто, да? Я не уверен, я не знаю. Наверное. Нет, сначала повтори просто. Зачем? Да для тебя они здесь. Ну, значит, не нужен ты мне. Нет, ну надо. Вот имейте в виду. Да, я понимаю, что ты ваши деньги. вот нет, это потому что... Ну нет, да. Ну нет. Shadow mind. Тогда тебе стоп, типа не то это. Нет, я же не отображаю, нет, Иван, это. Ну вот это есть, самое, там больше не дает. Вот это есть, да. Нет. Да нет. Вот нет. Народ, что здесь сюда надо. Нет, наоборот. Вот, это песня такой все, напоение. Нет, да, не возьмите работу, Хорошо. Если там снимаешь, или просто любом, да. Очень ну тебе. Кушать я хочу есть. Все уже отбился, как-то знаю. Все уже после.
То есть сегодня на меня лень и жор напали вдвоем. Так что не предавали. Взяли себе. Там нету даже холодно, там уже большая музыка, нет. Это обо мне, что ли, вот она имеет это, вот так вот, ну нет, ну дороже. Нет, нет. Да нет, вот нет, нет. Нет, я не знаю, вот это она не знаю, вот это. Вот нет, вот нет, вот это вот есть. Это курявые, просто курявые. Курявый. Да, надеюсь. Да, вот. Ну, понятно, да, это государственное имеется в виду. Ну вот нет, ну даже вот это есть, ну да. Ну нет, да, вот это и есть оно самое, да. Она понимает, да. Понимает, да. Да нет, понимает, Нет, смотри, видишь, я вот она видела там, а вот это она имеет в виду. А мне что-то перевели, что ли, да? Клавиатура там, не помню. Нет, смс-ка же обычно приходит. Ну, я так понимаю. Что должна прийти смс-ка, я посмотрю, конечно. Да, угнал, что это тебе берет.